And a pleasant evening, everybody. Guess who's back in the studio chair after a little hiatus? I'm your host, Zach Hughes, and this is Hot Topics. Tonight, I wanted to do a show, and I kind of titled it Spring Summer Roll because that's really what this is. We're going to talk about a couple of things, a few things tonight. But let's jump in there and get right to it. I'm going to do something a bit different on the Facebook Hot Topics page link tonight. I will be putting it in after the show, so you'll want to look for that after the show in the comments section. Now, getting down to business tonight, we're going to talk about homelessness and healthcare and a bunch of other stuff to jump back into it. Now, I have been gone for a few months from the studio chair, but I'm back and we're going to do this more and more. So let's get right into it. You know, oh wow, I got a lot to say about some things with homelessness, but let's get to it. Shall we? Because I'm telling you, I have a couple of things around homelessness tonight that is interesting that I want to kind of look into and get your input on as well. It's going to open up a little hot potato box, which is why it's called Hot Topics here on the show. Okay, so let's see, where do I want to start? So last week, or last couple weeks, I've gotten these a few weeks over the years actually, and rather recently more of a push around people who are homeless should be getting a job, should be getting better helped than they are getting helped. And I just, I feel I need to clarify a lot of things, having been on the ground with folks. In fact, just before the show, coming off the ground and coming home for the evening, after spending a few hours with folks out on the streets today. And I'm, what I find interesting is that people who have never, to my knowledge, and they can correct me, have experienced homelessness to this degree, along with not just experiencing homelessness, but also, like other things going on in their lives. So this idea of let's get a job, we need to help these people, or these people need to move along because there's just too many, quote, incentives to being homeless. Really? Incentives to being homeless? Like what? I can tell you there is no incentive to being homeless. I know that from our vantage point, from my vantage point in the studio here, it's easy to see, yeah, it looks like there are incentives. Like, you see people getting help, and you see them getting water service, showers, free shower offerings from different service providers, getting different things, quote, handouts. This is just not always the case on the ground. I've been on the ground with folks, and it's not the case. And what we need to do is get beyond this stigma that is going on. And I'm promoting this idea of trying to bring information out to people more so they have a better understanding of it if they wish to have it. It is possible that some folks will just say, no, that is just how I feel, and that's the way it's going to be for me. And that closes out a lot of things. Instead of complaining about people who are homeless, and you could we could find ways to get connected more. And I'm thinking about this with the state, particularly recently with this noisemaker thing, this raven bird thing down at the pavilion. Um, and I know that the state probably has a good intention on what it was trying to do, what its reasoning behind the raven thing is. They didn't want to have to. Well, first of all, the raven thing came about because of, as we know in the reports, what is a raven thing? It's well, I call it raven thing, or a noisemaker is what I also call it. And these things are really designed to be deterrents for animals, not humans. I know this has been tried in other cities. I've been getting reports of this. And I'm going to tell you, it still leaves a sour note in my mouth. Okay, I know, the reasoning was, well, we put a porta potty back there. There was some defecating on the porch of the pavilion. Yeah, the porch of the pavilion. What's interesting is we have a street outreach team, and I never got any, it didn't come across my desk until this happened. But had it come across, maybe street outreach could have gone over and checked it out and worked with the folks who were on the porch. And just saying, instead of just being, what we tried, we put a few signs out, we put a porta potty out, which I think is great. Or portalat, which is and that's great. And you're putting up signs, and that's great. But this population is more than just homelessness. This is about behavior. We know this. We also know that, the reality of the situation is it's more than meets the eye. And I think, the comments I fielded, over the last few weeks, and the interviews I've given, I think I've given one or two interviews, I give them one interview, and then my comments have shown up in other places. But this is kind of a bad taste in my mouth, and so what can be done differently to address either these stigmatizing comments around jobs? Because let me explain something, if I can, if you'll indulge me. I have a colleague who serves with me on a committee, and they send me these job postings with the hope that I'll share it with folks I work with. One of the problems is when I looked at the jobs, they're not compatible with the folks that I work with. The folks I work with are extremely, they're dealing with a lot of struggle. And so I'm not, sure it's just as simple as putting them into a job. And then my big question I love to ask everybody is, would you hire them? I'm going to bounce that question back to you because, people say they just need to get a job, and I get that. People are angry. They're taxpayers, and they're feeling like they're freeloading. Up until the taxpayer ends up homeless. And here's the beauty part of it. That is a possibility for every one of us. All it takes is, one disaster away. I had a woman say to me, when I replied to her about something, "Oh, I've never been homeless, so it'll never happen to me." Well, don't say never. And I think that's a lot of it. And I think there's a lot of, I want to be careful because last time I used this word, I got in trouble, but that's okay. I think there are privilege. And I think we all have privilege in a way, and we need to acknowledge that. Those of us who have homes, who have roofs over our heads, who have portable studios in our home, don't get to spend the night out there. And for every complainer who has an issue with homelessness, I implore you to spend the night outside, maybe two, and you don't get to bring your special stuff with you. You just carry what's good on your back, and you're out there for the night. And you may ask me, why should I do that? Let me tell you why you should do that, because I'm sick of hearing the complaints. And the reality is, the other thing I don't like about it is that folks don't understand what it's like. And, or maybe they don't care to understand. That's fine. We can go there, but the reality is this isn't going to go away. I had someone say the other day, well, why would someone not want to live in Montpelier when they have all the free stuff? And that's just not true. They don't have all the free stuff here. I've been on the ground for years here, and I can tell you they're not free stuff. And I'm going to say to you, if you feel that way, to go homeless for a week. And then you can come back to me and say how much free stuff you got. And that's really how I feel about this. Because this really gets old after a while. And yeah, you're hearing my rant tonight. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that work is being done, but it's not going to be done really quickly. And even for everybody who gets housed, there's always someone getting evicted, which is a sad thing. So I'm curious if folks want to dive in with me about this, a couple of things, because there's something I just want to kind of dive into, because there is such a thing as, and it came across my desk a couple times this week, so I want to address it. And that is, there's such a thing as enabling and helping people to advance. So what do I mean by that? Enabling is just basically providing the same level of support and service and not really getting anywhere with it. Like the daily, street outreach that has to be done, that gets done when you're out on street outreach. And are people advancing? The answer to your question about advancing I'll get to in a minute, but I'm curious about, because I had a colleague say, well, why aren't we helping these people instead of giving them enabling? And I think there's a couple different answers to that. I think that I work in the outreach business, service, and I can tell you that we recognize what enabling can be, and we slow that up. But I will tell you that it's not as simple as, providing, a brochure and here's some jobs. And I implore anybody who thinks it's that simple to try it out. Let me explain what, if I can try. I mean, I can't really know what it's like, but I can tell you here are some of the barriers that I often see. People have to, not only, if they were to have a job, let's just look at it this way. If they have a job, and they're dealing with a lot of struggles on the side, and I'm not talking about our struggles when we go home, when we have a roof over our head and headquarters where we can fall back to, that's fine, but folks outside don't have that. So they have to figure out where they're going to go, how they're going to be on a daily basis, because housing doesn't fall out of the sky. You don't get to just get a house, apartment. I'm sure people would love to have jobs, but I also know that they would struggle to have to find places. They'd have to figure out how to get from their place outside to the job, make sure they have proper hygiene for the job, There's all kinds of struggles out there. It's not just let's give them a job. Let's put them out there for a job. And yeah, if I think someone can work, I will say to them, you should try to get a basic job or something like that. And the reason is because there is a way of determining in one's mind, what's going on for the person, and what goes on for that person may not be what's going on for you. Understand that you have a home you can go to. These folks are outside. So anyone who had the idea of they're going to get a job and we're going to work that out, that's not it. My approach should be more of trying to get them get them housed first before getting them the job. So anyone who tells me they just need to get a job, that's a different, but housing is another whole matter. So for example, recently I witnessed someone get housed, but I have to say that I was concerned about them being able to maintain housing, because they have to be able to have the adequate support and also have to decide that they're going to follow the rules of the houses. Because there are rules. When you're in housing, there are rules. Unless you own your own house, and even then there are some rules. So I think what we need to do as a community is kind of think about these things before we go spatting off about, they just need jobs and they are getting free handouts. Well, and that's the thing. So, and then there's the other side of it. I shared something on my Facebook, and I'm going to be very careful with it tonight, but I will say that it was I might put it on the show. I'll put it on the comments section, so people can see what I'm talking about. But I want to say that let me put it to you this way. A few years ago, I started a photograph series with permission of each homeless person I worked with. If I felt there was a nice picture, I would ask them if it's okay if I take the picture that I wanted to take. And I called the series They Have Lives Too. And let me tell you something. They have lives too. And I know people are going to hem and hum at me about, the same thing I hear. They need to get jobs. I don't understand why they can't integrate in the community. Again, I implore you to spend the night outside and not camp. Camping like you camp in your backyard. You're going to go find a campsite. You're probably going to get moved along by the police, or by street outreach. Well, street outreach doesn't move people along. It just gives a note to them to move along. But I have to say that, if you were to experience it, that's what I'm saying. Everybody I've seen has never experienced it. I can guarantee you. Their comments are not even close. I've seen maybe a couple of people who have experienced it kind of say, that some of the folks are out of control. And they would know, a little bit because they've been out there. But the reality of the situation is we all need to continue to come together. So what does that look like? And I wanted to ask you how you would see the idea of what would that look like if we were to go and help people. And we do help them, but what I've heard from people is they can only get help. They could only get, why aren't we helping these people? And I'm just curious what your ideas would be, and then I can kind of talk about how real that might look. Like, I can, sometimes, as I said, there's some stuff. I love telling the good news. I have to say I don't like telling the drab news and explaining the situation. But what I wanted to get at today was that if we could, steer past the stigma of what we look at homelessness, and we look at it in the shoes of that each day this person or these people, whoever you want to put yourself in shoes with, you kind of follow them, kind of look at it in their shoes, and in reality of what's going to happen for them that day. And really, they don't really know what's going to happen for them that day. And that's what I want to make a point of. I think we all think it's easy to just hand somebody a brochure and say, and I did do this. That's how I know. I talked about this with somebody the other night. I said, my view of homelessness has changed and drastically in the last 28 years, if not more. And a couple of my exposures, if I can give them to you, because I think it comes powerful from me, because I actually did have a couple of exposures that in early. It's important. How did you? Actually, let me stop right now. How did you come about into the homeless world? How did you get exposed to it? Think about that. I would love to know. If you want to put it in the comments, I will actually put a question up and just see if any of you will answer it. And the reason I ask that is how I was exposed was, I originally thought it was a soup kitchen here in Montpelier, a soup kitchen, back in the late 90s. It wasn't that. My exposure occurred in Montreal. And I was doing an article, and I had the stigma and the notions, I admit. I had those. And so when I wrote a review of Montreal, I was critical of panhandling, and I didn't even call it that at the time. And I remember my journalism teacher flagged it and asked me to correct it, which I did. But that was my first run-in. And then my second run-in was at the soup kitchen. We went and visited. Okay. And I think those still left notions in me still, because I had not worked in the trenches of homelessness for several years. Starting out, when I started out my career path, it was mainly just providing peer support in different areas. And I've talked about it on this show because I think it's important. In 2011, I started to work directly with the homeless population. And the way I did it was that I was part of a team that was trying to place a couple into an apartment. And they were homeless. So I started to kind of build with these other providers. I was really interested in trying to build a network. This was done through a volunteer-based organization called Washington County Young Adult Committee, now Peer Plus. And we, so often, we would get the, hard situations to deal with, but the homelessness exposure helped change my view away from the notion of being critical of panhandling and or just saying they need to get a job, because there was more to it. And then I started to realize there was more to it than just giving them some services. The reality is, we know that without the proper support, services can fail. And that does happen. Our goal, my goal, when I work with people, and I had this conversation, I think I'm going to be putting this when I reply to this person, because they emailed me about this. My goal is a couple of different things. I mean, yes, I want everyone housed. I want everyone to have a safe home. But in order to do that, they have to have the supports in place in some cases. And Unfortunately, folks, we have to acknowledge that some people are not ready to get into housing just yet. And that was a hard kind of change for me, because I think what I often said was my goal is to house people at 100% goal. The problem is, it didn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because not everyone's ready for that. Because, being in housing is a big responsibility. I talked to you last year about, did a small series on what it was like to live in low-income housing. And I can just say there are rules. And people don't always last. And I know I have some of you out there jumping up and down saying, well, that's their choice. That's their choice. But, again, we don't know what's going on. The service, for everybody I've worked with, I have to learn that I don't know what is going on for that person. And it's not right for me to judge them in any way or form. And if I have over the years, I have often apologized. And if anyone feels I have, and watching tonight, I apologize again if I've done that to you. But judging to me is the wrongest thing to do. But humans do it. And we just have to watch that. I worry about this stigma going on. I really do. I don't know what else to say to it. I just know that things are getting, people, as I said, these folks have lives too. And that was a nice project, and I continue to do the project as I can. I found some nice things when I did that project. So, what does that look like when I say they have lives too? So they're not just sitting on the street all the time. Some of them had hobbies. They read books. They had stuffed animals. I got a couple good pictures of stuffed animals. And then there was a weekend I was working out there, and they were watching a pit bull. And we put a hat on the pit bull, and I just thought it was a cool thing. And they have lives too, so that is their life. And the one person who I know, people I know who do panhandle, I kind of, made notion of it that it may be what they do, and that is what they do. Now, I don't like certain jobs, but that might be their job. You ever think? I know people be like, no, Zach, that isn't their job. But that is something. And you choose to give to them, or you choose not to. That's the other thing I want to address tonight. Because I haven't been on for a while, so I'm really having fun here. I haven't been on. I will get to my story in a second, a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I want to talk about self-care a little bit after I'm done with this. And so, let me think. What was I going to say? I don't even remember what I was going to say, but my point is, these folks have, a lot of life to them. And what I was going to say is that jobs, what I was saying is that just because we don't like people panhandling, and that is what they do. And one panhandler in particular has said to me that they would gladly take anything else. So they're not just taking money. They said to me that if somebody wanted to bring them a supply directly, they can. But that is where they are right now. As to whether they will get back into work, I think they're mainly worried about getting into housing right now. I think that's what we need to understand. People need to get into a house so that they can go to work, so that they can feel like they have a place to go home to at night, and not the church bench, after work. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are a few people who are working tonight who are homeless, and I commend them, because I'll tell you, I don't know how to do it. Just because of all the stuff you have to do, to keep yourself safe. So I really want to just leave you there with that. I'd be interested in knowing if you want to over the next week. Put it in the comments here, and I'll somehow put it in that I want you to do that. And what I want you to do is talk about how help could work. Like, this person who emailed me last week, because I asked for their views, and what they said was, hey, good evening, Elizabeth. What they said was, if we could just help these people. I'm sick of enabling. And, I think it's a fine line, though. I really do. And, I think we have to look at that. So when you think about this, and you're probably going to tell me they need to get a job. But how would you do that? How would you go about doing that? I'm going to give you a challenge, and I know people are I don't need to do that because it's not my job. Not my job. But I'm asking you because it's really interesting, and I am asking other people out there, what would that look like? Because my answer to my colleague, I'm going to be emailing them this week, is going to be kind of a mixed bag, because it's not a simple thing. Believe me, if it was, we wouldn't have to have all these supports available. Like, you wouldn't have to have street outreach. We're fortunate that we have street outreach capability here, and there's plenty of services. Like, when the state did that noisemaker thing, really, the state hasn't made a phone call, hasn't said, you know what, state security never called outreach and said, hey, we could use some assistance here. Now, whether those folks would have responded to the assistance is a different story, but it would have been an attempt. Handing out survival guides is sort of a start, but that's like me throwing a brochure down and saying, here you go. Instead of, and that's really important to understand. There is a lot to it. So, let's jump into what self-care looks like. I got to tell you, this year has been something else for me. And how many of you have actually stopped and thought about your health a little bit? Like, I'll tell you, I've been cruising along on a highway or an expressway. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I, didn't give it a thought. Just was like, I'm living my life. And then I came down with infection number 1 in April. Let me tell you something about that. It happened really fast. So you don't have, much time to think about it. And infection number 1, I cleared it. It took me about a month or so to clear that. It involved me stopping everything, and at the behest of my best friend and vice president, who serves alongside me at Vermont Psychiatric Survivors, who virtually told me, you're not doing anything until this clears. And I cleared it. I celebrated it. I was so happy. I shared it with my friends. I said, this is great. And then around Juneteenth, I got another infection. And at this point, I'm like, oh, great. And it took me a few days to go get medical attention, and I did. And it took several weeks. I'm still dealing with the remnants of if the infection itself is gone. That's not the problem now. But my point is, how many of you have actually looked at your health and said, shouldn't I check this out? Shouldn't I do this? And a lot of us just don't. We ride that highway. We think we have all the time in the world. And then you have the doctor who comes in after you go to the hospital the second time, tells you some really rough news. And I remember when she did that, I had worked with her the first time, which was a month and a half before. And she's like, "Do you remember I think I worked with you." I said, "Yeah, you did work with me." And then she got down to business. She was very matter of fact. You know what I mean? And she told me I had an infection in the blood. And you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear infection in the blood. Um, and I do remember she told me what the treatment would require. Um, and I looked at her in her face when she said the infection was in her blood, in my blood, and I'll never forget the look in my face. I knew I had a look in my face, and that look was kind of probably fear. And the reason is because it's in my blood. So you have to understand when something's in your blood, that becomes life-threatening, possibly. Okay? And so that whole experience was very hard. Um, Part of my treatment required I had to go to rehab at Woodridge. I don't mind mentioning, because they were just wonderful over there. But I wanted to say that, you know, it's easy to knock Central Vermont Medical Center, but they did a wonderful job with me both times without major issues going on. And when you have to go through this change, when you realize that health is more important and all the other stuff just drifts away, like suddenly everything stops. And it does. And I do remember that I had to take this break, where I had to, it took, getting through that major part to get out of the woods, as one of my colleagues would say. I had to spend 2 weeks in the nursing home, and before that, 8 days in the hospital. And of course it's summertime, so I'm watching summer kind of blast by. And health to me is really, I've always said self-care, but I have to, we're not always good at it. We say we're good, but we're not. We say we're good. And really what's good is you're supposed to take care of yourself. You're supposed to stop during the day and take care of yourself. And for me, I have to carve out time now during my day to take care of myself for a couple of things. And that's not a selective self-care switch. It's either I do that or it gets, things get worse. So, I think health is very important as we talk about, especially, I hate to say, I had someone tell me I looked 30 years old the other day. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the compliments. Because it was probably the youngest I'd ever heard someone tell me I was young. Because I always make people guess. I do. Actually, I have fun with it. Sometimes I'll ask them to guess, and then I'll guess their age. And, I get a variety of different ages. And one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people see me as younger than I actually am, which I'll take to be very cool. And when they said I was 30, boy, that was really cool. But when you get older, there are new healthcare things that pop up. We know that, and the older folks are like, so tell me, oh yeah, Zach, you should have known. Zach, wait till and they're going to tell me that. I know you guys are going to tell me that. But for somebody who hasn't really had much for health issues, having this happen twice to me this year was kind of a shock. It wasn't the same. It was similar. It wasn't the same issue. But it was similar. And both incidents landed me in the hospital, okay? And I'm just, and I joke about it, and I joke, because I like humor. People are like, oh my God, and I'm like doing a humor thing. I'm like, well, I hope the third time's not the charm. And folks are like looking at me, even in the hospital. Nurses just love me, and I'm doing a little humor thing here. Because again, I haven't been on in a while, so I'm having a little fun. And, so when I was in the hospital and the nursing home, my joke was always, like they'd bring the coffee in, It was hot. I'd say, well, you're at the hospital. I'd say, well, if I get burned, we're already here. And I get this really strange look, like, really strange look. They're not into that. Just want to make sure we're still going out. Yeah, we are. They get a strange look. I get a strange look, of course, and then I explain it's humor. They're like, okay. And I have a lot of humor around crisis. I used to supervise a crisis bed, and I think one of my bosses said my humor was a problem. He didn't really like my humor. And I explained to him that we deal with crisis, and so there is going to be a little bit of humor, regardless of, you're not going to change me around it, and it has to do with how we get by, how people work by the situation, and I think this was a tough one. This was the worst. I mean, to me, when you have to make these decisions, sometimes you do not have the decision to make. This time I had the decision to make, okay? I can do it. But there are going to be times when I don't have that decision to make. And I'll give you two different scenarios. Of course, some of you have already been through it, probably been like, Zach, you know what, I've been in the hospital. I know what you're talking about. But let me give you it from my angle so you might not know what I'm talking about. So, I have heard many people, say, well, I'd never do that, go to a nursing home. Okay, well, that's great. That's you, and I'm so glad you're able to make that decision. But let me talk about what happens if you have no choice. So, the issue around a lot of my nursing home stays have to do with whether I can take care of myself at home. You'll say the same thing to me. Well, that's true, Zach. Yeah, no shit. Excuse my language. But that is true. But let me explain from my angle. So if I'm not able to do it, then I do have to go to a nursing home. And there was a difference here. I had not had surgery or anything that required me to, that I wouldn't have been able to do it. This one presented me with a possibility. Like, I thought I could, do it. And there were people trying to keep me from, leaving the hospital early. And the reason I wanted to leave early is because I didn't want to go to the nursing home. And no one does. But it has issues for me personally. So, it was a hard thing. But I had more choice. I had more movement this time around. That's what I noticed. The other time around, I didn't really have choice in movement because I was kind of restricted because of my surgery that I'd had. I think that kind of helped me through. I think the placement I was at in Woodridge was helpful. I think there's just a lot of things that you don't always get the choice, and sometimes you don't always get to. You can choose to go to Woodridge, but if they don't have a bed, you have to go somewhere else. Yeah, you can go home, but you may not be capable of it. I think those decisions are extremely hard, and that's why I think people need to slow down once in a while on that big expressway called life, as Aretha Franklin would sing, and take that exit ramp and assess a little bit. Make sure your health is good. Like, how many of you have actually gone to the doctors lately? How many of you actually checked your health? And if you haven't, you probably should, especially as you get older. And I know people, of course I go to my doctor, or I would do it. Yes, you would do it. But it's possible that we're all saying that, like I used to say. We used to always say, well, of course I'm taking care of myself. And that doesn't always happen, does it? So, that's what I'm looking at for self-care. And I'll tell you what, I am looking better now. because another critical agency to taking care of you outside, if you qualify for it, and some do, and most do, is our Central Vermont Home Health and Hospice, and there's a couple others, I believe, and they're useful, they're helpful in maintaining your ability to stay home, and there's all kinds of tiers of care here, and I've got to be honest with you, healthcare to me was, I was naive up until March. When was that? Oh my God, it's like such a long time. March 19th, 2010 is when I got my wake-up call around healthcare. Before that, I was nice and naive and cruising along. And I pride myself with my health being so good for so long and continuing to be good for the most part. But I have to be in continuous vigilance, because you just never know. Things can pop up. And so I just wondered how many of you have actually, engaged in more than just self-care, but making sure your health is looking good. All right, so let me see where we are. Oh, well, we've got 10 more minutes together. I cannot believe that we are almost to the end of August. My goodness, these summers do fly. It's just the way it is, right? And it's just crazy. So I hope that folks, get their vacations in, do what they need to do. I often told, it's too short. This is why you can't get people to board meetings during summer, because nobody wants to waste their summer. Actually, the summer hasn't been too terrible, and except for running into health issues. I think it happening in the summer was critical. It's better to happen when you go outside and you're not stuck. And I am going to devote another show, I think, to the experience of what it's like to have to make decisions and like this, and have to go through things like this around health care, because it's really kind of a scary, it can be kind of scary, and I think, but in my closure, tonight, I want you to give some thought to what I talked about earlier around enabling of people who are outside, living outside, and or how do you propose getting them help other than dropping them a job listing and saying, here's some work listing for you. I'd be curious how you would go about it. And the reason is because, it is true that because I do have to agree with my colleague a little bit, but I wish it were that easy. My colleague just is seeing it from a different picture lens than what I see it as. And what I see it as, while people can criticize the services that are provided and that people are getting free handouts, so of course they're going to want to stay homeless. To my knowledge, no one has ever said to me, well, I'd rather be homeless because I can get this, and this. It is possible, however, that there are a few who do that, but I am going to stand fast that most people want to be housed. And there is no incentive. There is really no incentive. A couple of times when I was younger, I might have said, well, I want to just run away, and that would have probably made me homeless. I can tell you there's a lot of pressure, though, to people who are not used to living in an apartment, or house for the first time. If they have been homeless for a long time and that's all they know, there is certain ways that things happen. And I think we just keep rolling at it, and I appreciate everybody for coming out tonight to welcome my show back. And I'm going to try to do this on a weekly run again. It's just been a wonderful thing to be able to do this show. Um, and I did notice we had a light rain going on out there tonight, and and that was actually nice to experience from the comfort of a porch. Again, it's interesting that we have the comfort of our own homes. I look at that tonight, and the ceiling, I'm pointing at the ceiling, but the roof over our heads. I have learned so much from everybody that I have worked with. I didn't need college about it. You know why? Because I learned. My notion of you just need to get a job or you need to do this. First of all, we probably need to stop using the word need. I think that that's a problem. When you say you need, I don't need to do anything. I can sit back and do nothing. There's better ways to communicate. I think communication is the number one thing we're missing. And, one of the things as I leave you tonight is just to think about that light rain. Would you like to be spending the night out in that? And put yourself in the shoes of folks. And then kind of talk, if you want to present it in chat, and say, look, this is how I would look at doing it. And there's just a lot to this. It isn't the simple thing of, get a job. Because if it were, we would be in a better, if that was true, if we could just wave a wand and hire everybody, that would be the most wonderful thing. I think the other thing that we need to kind of look at before I go here tonight is I do acknowledge everyone's frustration around behaviors. But again, it's easy to mix that into the whole thing if you don't evaluate the entire situation. And I'm wondering, where accountability really begins, because in order for accountability to work, everybody has to be on board with accountability. So, just because you think that it's a good idea for someone to go to jail maybe, or something like that, and what's sad is I did hear from someone recently, well, it's Vermont, it is, you get a citation, you don't go to jail. It's not like other states. Sometimes, most of the time, you'll get a citation or a $200 bill. But the reality is with behaviors, if you need to have a closer look at the person's situation, particularly if they're outside. And I'm not excusing their behavior, because I have personally confronted several people because of their behavior. And it's either, they say, oh, you know what, Zach, I'm sorry about that, or they tell me to fly off the cliff for the day. Or they tell me to get the hell out. Excuse my language, but that's the reality of what it's like to work on the ground, okay? And the ground is really a cool place to work, in a sense. I have a knack for it. And I just do what I need to do. So, this show is a wonderful thing, and we're going to come back with it, and we're going to keep an eye on some things going on. We're going to look at that, how that Raven thing's going at the pavilion. We're going to check that out, see what's really, and we're going to just keep going here. And I'm Zach Hughes, and this has been Hot Topics, and you know what, it's time for me to go, and I am going to put the item in the chat after the show. I'm going to be putting the Facebook page in there, and I am going to start putting the shows, putting links to the shows again. I have to upload it to YouTube because our friends at Facebook will delete the show after 30 days. So I have to do that. So you'll see a YouTube link when I'm done doing all that. But I would appreciate your commentary on what I've talked about tonight. I'll put a question out on the Facebook page as well. And, also look for little short videos from me. I like to call them, like cabin side chats. And so you can look for some short videos from me in the near future on different topics. But I will be back here hopefully next Sunday around 7 p.m. And I'm going to send positive energy out to my friend Nikki tonight, as she's not feeling too well, and I just wanted to send positive energies out to her tonight as we close off. I'm Zach Hughes, and I am out of here. This has been Hot Topics. See you next time.